PC Perspective's 2011 Computex coverage is brought to you by Antec, a quarter century of quality and innovation, and by MSI, insist on the best. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the PC Perspective podcast. This is episode 157 for June 2nd, 2011. I'm Ryan Shrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm kind of a stuffy Josh Walrath.
And I'm Al Malventano.
This is, I guess, our mid-Computex show. I guess the big news stories have already occurred. I am in Taipei covering the show. Everybody else on the podcast is back at home comfy. So while it is evening time for them, it is 10 a.m. for me here. So pending quality internet connections and lack of drop-offs, we'll go ahead and get started here with some of the news. The first thing we're going to talk about, actually, is with Alan going over a review that he published this week of the OCZ Agility 3 SSD. Now, first thing I'm going to have you explain, Alan, is what are the different lines here that OCZ has that maybe some people get confused? They have Vertex, they have Agility. What's the other one? They have Solid. They have other items in that category. Where does this fall into their product line?
Yeah, OCZ has a whole bunch of lines, but specific to SandForce-controlled SSDs, they have Vertex, which we actually looked at a couple of Vertex models 1.5, 2 months back. It was sort of rapid fire there. We saw like what was going to be their Pro or their Enterprise version of the Vertex, and then there was going to be just a consumer-grade one, which had less over-provisioning and gave you like 240 gig instead of 200 gig. And then they sort of backed off on that Enterprise one, at least for the moment. So really, there's only Vertex 3, and now there's Agility 3, and then there's also Solid 3, and I just listed those in order from like best to cheapest, I guess you could call it. So
Okay.
Agility 3 is supposed to be mid-grade performance, hopefully the one that most people end up going for, because usually that middle ground is like the sweet spot on price per performance. It was a little bit interesting, though, because same thing happened last time. There was Vertex 2, Agility 2, and Agility used what was supposed to be cheaper flash memory, and it used different protocol. Mm-hmm. And same deal here, and the same thing happened this time that happened last time, where some of the performance, depending on what you're doing with it, it actually goes faster. So you have the mid-grade drive, in some ways, outperforming the high-end drive. Now, this isn't for all cases, and if you fill the drive to the brim, it doesn't perform as well, those sorts of things. So things where the Vertex 3 you can really beat up on, and it's better at dealing with that sort of stuff, because what's actually going on there is the Vertex 3 is talking to the flash memory at close to 3 times the speed that the Agility 3 talks to its flash memory. So the idea is flash memory works at different speed grades. So it's not so much really whether or not it's going to hold your data, because the rating stays pretty constant there. The differences in flash memory is how fast they can talk. So their Micron is still selling some of the Onfi 1.0 standard flash memory, even at higher, even at smaller processes. In other words, 34 nanometer is what was the standard a while back, and now there's 25, and people are moving to 20 nanometer. And it's IMFT that produces it, right? The grades that we're talking about here, and Micron being the other one. So we're used to seeing Intel all over the place. Well, now we're seeing flash memory coming from Micron. And they're probably able to move a little bit more of it than the competition, just because they're going for the slower speed grades. Now, granted, I'm saying slower, but we're talking each flash chip can still talk in the Onfi 1.0 standard. I think it's 50 megabytes a second. So it's asynchronous. It doesn't use a clock, but it ends up communicating at around 50 megabytes a second. Well, when you combine that with the controllers talking to 4 or 8 flash chips in parallel, that's enough to saturate even serial ATA 6 gigabit. So there's not a lot of overhead there, or I should say headroom, not overhead. So that's where the Agility starts to fall short, when you really overload it with a bunch of stuff at the same time, or not same time, but it's really full of data beforehand, and then you try to do writes to it. In other words, times when the controller would need to do some rearranging of the data behind the scenes as you're trying to do some fresh writes to the drive. That's where the Agility starts to slow down, where the Vertex would has much more headroom to deal with when it's talking to its flash memory, and it talks much faster. I think Vertex 3 is 133 megabytes a second versus the 50. Unless I got my numbers jumbled a little there, but that's around what the speed grades are there. Yep, I was right. So shows Burke.
So what's the price difference here? Is it significant right now, or is it something you're still trying to weigh based on what the market's going to show?
Yeah, it's too tough to call right now, and that actually brings up a very important point, is that the Vertex 3, the word we got when it came out was that, hey, look, they're using the newer, smaller process flash memory. It's supposed to be in not necessarily crazy cheaper compared to before, but it should be competitive to the point where we were hearing that the Vertex 3s would be coming out same cost per gig as the Vertex 2s were just recently. That wasn't the case. Granted, the MSRPs were sort of like that when Vertex 3 came out, but then the market took over and the whole supply versus demand thing, and all of a sudden prices just shot up to the point where Vertex 3 wasn't on the market too long, and we saw cost per gig. Well, let's just go for the example of the price of the drive. The MSRP was supposed to be $500 for a 240 gigabyte Vertex 3, and it's on the market now for $620. So we're talking so $120 price premium just based on people are trying to, it's just market driven, right? When the market's higher than MSRP, there's just not enough supply. So the Agility 3, all we saw at the time of publishing this review and even up till just a few minutes ago is still a lot of introductory type pricing. So pricing that's close to the MSRP, but then when you actually go to the website and look at it, it's, coming soon or expected, next week, that sort of thing. So we can't really make the call yet. What I hope will happen is that between the Agility and the Vertex at the same time, there'll be more supply, and hopefully the prices will drop on both fronts. And the idea is that the Agility 3's MSRP is supposed to be at least like $20 or $30 cheaper than the Vertex 3 for any given capacity. So that's the supposed to be thing. Well, let's just hope that it ends up playing out that way. If enough reviews come out, if enough of these reviews come out that show the Agility 3 edging above the Vertex 3 in some of the benchmarks, which I've seen elsewhere as well, then who knows? The Agility 3 might end up more expensive than the Vertex. Maybe kind of backwards, but But yeah, we are sort of riding that line on demand outstripping supply, at least for the moment.
All right. Well, listen, then we'll keep an eye on there. Another story I want to tell you about here is we talked about a lot about Lucid Virtu technology since basically the first preview of it we saw at CES, and then it finally was released kind of in March, and then with the Z68 launch last month, it's kind of become a mainstream thing. Pretty much all of the Z68 motherboards that we have seen include this software. I think they said to us yesterday there are 40 motherboard SKUs currently shipping with Lucid Virtu software in there. Virtu, if you don't know, again, is the ability to take advantage of the discrete graphics features of the integrated graphics on the Sandy Bridge processor at the same time without having to switch monitor cables or change any settings in your operating system or anything like that. So they were previewing a new version of the software at Computex called Lucid Virtu Universal, and the difference here, there's three main things that change. First thing that they've changed is they're adding support for AMD platforms. So this means that for the upcoming Llano launch, whatever that app actually happens to be, you'll be able to use the same Virtu Universal type interface and take advantage of any of the features of the integrated graphics on Llano or any of the upcoming APUs while still getting the gaming performance of your discrete graphics card, whether it be an NVIDIA or an AMD graphics card. So that's good news for people who are looking forward to the Llano platform. They're also adding support for notebooks as well. Remember, this was something that was only on the desktop side for now. So now Virtu is going to go head-to-head against NVIDIA's Optimus technology and AMD's technology that they're coming out with that does a similar thing for their notebooks as well, the switchable graphics technology. It'll be curious to see how that works out because Optimus is a very good, stable, reliable technology. We've used a lot of laptops with it and have really come to like what they've done. I don't know if Lucid will be able to keep up with that feature set. It's possible, and it's also possible that some of these manufacturers will kind of focus on Lucid Virtu rather than an NVIDIA one and an AMD one. That way they can kind of simplify their product development pipeline and that kind of thing as well. So that's pretty interesting. That'll be available probably end of June timeframe, and then again whenever the Llano technology comes out, that will be available as well. They were demoing it running on an AMD 890 chipset at their suite, just showing you that it does work on an AMD platform. Now the third thing that they introduced is kind of more interesting for us in the gamers and enthusiast markets out there, is that they're introducing a feature called Virtual VSync. Quick history here, Josh, or anybody correct me if this is off base.
You're wrong.
Oh, okay. Anyway, let me try again. VSync is the technology needed to avoid mismatched refresh rates between the game and the display. So basically your display can output 60 frames per second, 60 hertz, maybe 120 hertz if you have one of those new displays. And if you've ever played a game with the VSync off, you might notice some visual tearing where the images on vertical lines don't match up. That happens when the GPU is changing the contents of the frame buffer quicker than the screen is actually refreshing the image on the screen. So the VSync, when it's enabled, basically caps the game at 60 frames per second or a multiple thereof, 60, 45, 30, something like that, something even that it can make sure it matches in step with the display. Now that's I don't know about you guys, that's how I play games today. On my home PC, when I'm playing Portal 2 or whatever, I turn on VSync because I don't like the visual tearing, even though I know my Radeon 6870 or 5870 that I have in there can definitely push more than 60 frames per second on Portal 2. What do you guys prefer?
I'd prefer a solid
VSync
60
on.
to a bouncing around 120, 240, 30.
Yeah.
That just, it's not fun.
There's something to add to that though. Some games, depending on how they're coded, with VSync on, it'll end up adding like a frame or two of lag as well, like display lag.
Exactly.
That's which is annoying as heck to some. Like if you're.
And that's because if you happen to make a mouse motion right at the beginning of where it's starting to load a frame, it will wait 2 frames so it has the new. It's basically waiting until the next timed, 16 millisecond time before it will draw the next frame on the screen. That was also one of their points that they pointed out, is that a lot of people play with VSync off because they can tell a difference in the responsiveness and lag response of the interface. So, I mean, have you actually experienced that before, Alan or Josh?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
So, you guys prefer to play with it off then? I'm just guessing.
Well, it depends. That's
on
the
the
thing.
game.
It depends on the app or
Okay.
the game, really.
Okay.
Most of the time off.
The virtual VSync technology is pretty interesting, and it's really hard to explain from a technical standpoint. It was hard for me to kind of re-explain after it was explained to me in the meeting how it works. And it's basically they have an algorithm now that will detect where visual tears will occur on the screen, and it will adjust how much of that frame is actually sent from the discrete GPU to the integrated GPU. Remember, we're still talking about using Virtu technology here. So the discrete GPU is doing the rendering. It'll send it to the integrated GPU to be output to the display. So what basically they're saying now is they've figured out a way to send partial frames, and they might, if it's less than 10% of a frame that's going to be shown in that time frame of the next refresh, that they might not even send it all, report to the game that it took 0 milliseconds to render that and move on to the next one automatically. And so what they were showing was much higher than 60 frames per second running without visual tearing at all. They demoed it in Call of Duty 4, Devil May Cry 4, which is obviously an older game, but it did seem to work, and it was a very interesting It's a very interesting technique on how they're doing it. I was asking them a lot of questions. So, what is fraps reporting? What are frame rates reporting? Is it reporting how many frames are actually being rendered? Is it reporting how many frames are actually being displayed? Are they partial frames, full frames? And they're saying now that it's only full frames are being reported by your frame rate measuring tools and utilities. So it's one of those things where we got to play it for 5 or 10 minutes on 2 different titles. They demoed it for a while on both notebooks and desktops, and there were very big differences, right? You turn on VSync in the game without virtual VSync, and you'll see the frame rates are capped at 60 as you would expect. And then we've got some videos on the website as well that if you see where you turn on VSync in the game and a virtual VSync in the Lucid software, and you're getting 260 frames per second running on a GTX 480 playing Call of Duty 4. So the technology is there, and it's very interesting. And they say you don't have the input lag issue, and you get the full performance of your GPU without limiting it to 60 frames per second. So I don't know. What do you guys think about this idea? Is it something you would be interested in trying, or does it sound pretty gimmicky?
You have to have it plugged into the integrated graphics, though, don't you?
Yeah, you do have to have. So you have to have a Lucid Hydra or a Lucid Virtu enabled system. So you have to, in this case, you do have to plug it directly into the integrated graphics. You have to plug your monitor into the integrated display output, and then use the Virtu in that direction. So you're using the iGPU mode, not the DGPU mode.
So it sounds like this thing basically intelligently figures out which GPU is slower, gives it less work to do, so that both of them end up finishing at the same time, and you end up with less weight.
No, the discrete GPU is still doing all of the rendering. The integrated GPU is only patching together the images to output. So what the algorithm is doing is it's basing it on the refresh rate of your display and the timings of it, and it will be able to guess where the tears are going to be and render. Not it renders the whole frame, but say you're going halfway down, it notices there's going to be a tear right there. It will send just the next half of that frame necessary to complete the image, so to speak.
Okay.
So that's how you get the improved performance without the tearing.
Okay, that makes sense, because then it's not the VSync that everybody's used to hearing. Then they changed the definition, sort of. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
That's good.
Josh, anything?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds interesting. I mean, everybody likes to have, better performance and less lag and all that without the tearing. So it's kind of an interesting image enhancement routine that they're doing there. Just curious how well it's going to work.
Yep. They say in a couple of weeks we'll have some beta version of the software, or demo version of the software, so we'll be able to play around with it and see. Let's move on. We got a lot of other news to get to. One thing here, this was actually posted as like a rumor last week, and we actually got to see it yesterday. This was Gigabyte offering Z68-based motherboards that are going to be bundled with the Intel 311 microsata SSD on board. So there's a microsata port on it, and they're going to offer some models that just have the mSATA port, and then some models that will ship with the Intel Larson Creek SSD 20 gig already on there for your SSD caching technology. And what I thought was really cool about it, so it's the one that we saw was kind of like a mid-range Z68 motherboard, probably one that most of us would actually purchase. Not one of these $300, $400 boards. For just the board. So the Z68 XP UD3 iSSD it's a fully featured board, ships with that SSD, and it will be about $249. They're saying, which is pretty compelling considering. I don't know, Alan, how much is an Intel 311 SSD? Like $120 or something like that.
We heard 100.
Okay,
so that's pretty darn good, actually. You're talking a Z68 board, and
good.
Yeah. That is good. And considering you're probably just going to plug one of those into it and just leave it there and never touch it anyway. So it just sort of makes sense that it comes bundled.
Yeah, I do like the idea. It's like, well, okay, you don't have to buy a 2.5-inch drive. Find a place to put it in your system. This is kind of built onto the board. It's built onto the platform as a whole, and you don't really have to kind of worry about it anymore. I agree. I think it's a good idea. They're the only motherboard vendor that was showing anything like that, and I think it's a really reasonably priced if you can get it for $250 with that SSD. So that's something I think they said would be available before the end of this month as well, if it's not already. So if you're interested in the Intel SRT technology, which Alan has talked about many times before, it's definitely worth a look for that if you're going to upgrade your platform anyway. Okay, we're moving on. ASUS had way too much stuff to announce, which is usually the case at Computex. Some of the notebook portable sides of things. They had some Amigo netbook. They had one really, really cool netbook called the UX series, which is as thin, maybe a little bit thinner, but it's right in the same area as the new MacBook Air, 17 millimeters at its thickest points, about 2 pounds aluminum alloy body, and it's based on a Sandy Bridge Core i7 processor, SATA 6 gigabit per second SSD. It has an instant on feature, right? So it'll basically go from standby to awake in 2 or 3 seconds, which is pretty nice to see. We have some pictures of this on the website as well, where it's incredibly thin. It's probably in line with the Google MacBook Air, the Apple MacBook Air. So check that out. They have a lot of interesting tablets. They're still showing the Pad phone, which is brand new. That's the tablet that has a phone that plugs into it. I'm not sure how much excitement there's actually going to be in the market for that. More interesting, I think, for what Asus showed off was new motherboards, Core i7 motherboards, the Maximus 4 Gen Z, the Maximus 4 Extreme Z. These are all Z68 offerings of their ROG line. And then, of course, the Crosshair 5 Formula Thunderbolt motherboard, which is a 990FX board that includes a Thunderbolt card, I guess is what it's called. Have you seen one of these, Josh? It's like a combination sound.
It's a Zonar matched with one of those darn Bigfoot Networks cards all wrapped into one shiny, well, actually black matte package.
So they're going to offer that with and without that add-in card. So it'll be about $100 price difference or something like that, $8 price difference. I bet you can guess which one we would recommend.
Hey, what was the screen resolution on that netbook?
Which one?
Yeah, any of them.
The ultra thin one?
Yeah, especially.
Let's see.
Because
I think it was a 13.3 inch screen, but I don't know what the resolution is here. I'm looking through trying to find the press release on it.
I'm just hoping it's higher than like what we're comparing it to, which is the Air, right? Or at least the same.
Oh, right.
Right.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, the Z68, you'd kind of figure it would be.
Yeah, that would be definitely a good point to bring up, right? Because
the processor can push it.
Yeah, exactly. You need to see that much beef behind the thing, and then it have like some really cheesy resolution or 1366 by something, or
right.
You never know.
I'll double check. Asus also showed 2 new GTX 580 graphics cards. I think we kind of talked about these last week. The new GTX 580 Matrix and the Mars 2. So the Matrix is a single GPU GTX 580, 3-slot cooler. It's got support for 19-phase power, highly overclockable, though it doesn't come overclocked a lot out of the box, which is something that I commented on when I was at the booth and thought was a little odd. They're claiming 20% improved thermals than the NVIDIA reference design, which I guess I would hope with as giant a cooler as it is. More interesting probably
what the nice thing about that design is? After 5 years, you can gather those up and build essentially a brick house with it.
Yeah, right. The probably better for that construction process would be the Mars 2. You remember the Ares card that came out last year? That was the one the guy wanted to swipe his debit card up your... I clicked on, somebody tried to buy it from me off the stage. In that same line of uber expensive limited edition graphics cards, the Asus Mars 2 is actually a dual GTX 580 graphics card on a single PCB with 3 gigs of memory, same kind of 19-phase power and cooler design on this. Obviously, it'll be running at stock speeds, and I'm trying to remember what they claimed it was. It's already running 20-something% faster than the GTX 590, 25-30% faster than the GTX 590. So, yeah, I expect that to be in the same $1,000 to $1,200 price range, and I think they did say they're going to make a limited edition run of that, of about 1,000 cards. So maybe we'll have one at QuakeCon and somebody else can try to buy it from me. You never know.
Maybe.
Has anybody looked at the new Corsair H80 and H100 coolers that were announced?
Just a little bit.
I read up on this.
In fact, I've got something that's kind of funny to talk about with the H80. That's the one that's the double size radiator, right?
It's the 240.
Well, yeah,
But
so
the
there's
240
the H80 is one fan, but double the width, and the H100 is the one that's like a dual radiator,
Yeah.
like that's larger.
Okay. Well, the
in
width
size.
one that I'm talking about, apparently, and this could be other people from other companies talking, but they found that even with a high-pressure static fan, that there was so much resistance with these double-sized radiators, it actually doesn't cool as well as some of the single-sized ones. So I think it's interesting that the Corsair's doing this because they say, hey, we got double the cooling in the same kind of small package, but in fact you get enough fins in there and enough resistance that it actually slows it down. Now that one, the double size that's on the screen where it's 120 by 240, that works as advertised. That's double the surface area, better cooling, everything's fine. But those double thick ones that you're dealing with some hydrodynamic flows internally to that radiator that it's causing to be far less effective than you really were hoping to be.
That's interesting. We'll have to see when we get them in-house for testing. But they're definitely – Corsair also has a lot of other stuff. They announced some new cases here at the show. The Corsair H80 and H100, they were showing off their – what's that called? Corsair Link. Remember ESA? You guys remember the NVIDIA ESA
yes,
architecture?
NVIDIA's answer to all management computer things, heating, cooling.
Yeah, so Corsair Link is like the same idea, but for Corsair-enabled electronics, and they do some cool things with LEDs. You can buy LED kits, and then you can control them in software, and you can set them to change color as temperatures change colors as power consumption changes. They do some pretty cool things. I just wonder if we haven't gone down this road before, and how much of this is old hat to enthusiasts that don't really want to see that kind of stuff anymore. So. But
nobody ever
always,
introduced any products from NVIDIA using that technology. I mean, there's a couple of people.
There were a couple of power supplies and stuff,
was one
but
of
it
them.
was awful. Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
Hopefully
ESA done
it'll
right.
take off. Yeah.
Trademark it.
Intel had some interesting showings here at Computex. They defined a new category of mobile device, what they're calling an ultrabook, which is kind of an odd name because it doesn't really say anything about being thin and light. Ultra, I would tend to be like high performance. They say it will marry the performance and capabilities of today's laptops and tablet-like features and deliver a highly responsive and secure experience in a thin, light, and elegant design. So that's pretty much what every thin and light product announcement has said since the beginning of time. But what is kind of interesting here is that they were talking about how the technology aspects of their process, Sandy Bridge and Atom lines, are going to kind of come together and address these different markets. So they're saying Sandy Bridge systems are becoming ultra responsive, and that they're basically building these incredibly low voltage, low power versions of Sandy Bridge, and Ivy Bridge that will be due out next year on the 22 nanometer process is going to continue that trend. And then even Haswell in 2013, they just briefly discussed, is a new architecture and will accelerate the same kind of category. So much like we saw with the 22 nanometer transistor announcement, the 3D Tri-Gate transistor announcement last month, where it seemed like Intel was more focused on the power benefits of that technology, less than the performance benefits of that technology. It seems that is the case even with their upcoming Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge, Haswell product transitions, that I'm sure they'll still come out with high-performance desktop offerings, but I think they're finally seeing, okay, they're changing their direction to lower power and not so much as ultra performance. It seems like they haven't had any competition in the ultra performance space in quite a long time, so it kind of makes sense, I guess. The other thing is they showed their Atom line. They were going to start going, what do they call it, one process node per year. So they're going to move to, they're already in 32 nanometer. They're going to 22 nanometer in 2013 and 14 14 nanometer in 2014, and this is all an accelerated transition in order to make sure that they have Atom parts that will go in tablets, that will go in cell phones, that are going to address these markets. Obviously, the ARM threat is very serious to them, and this is part of their answer for that competition. Any more thoughts on kind of what they're doing with the Atom architecture in that way, or?
Yeah, they originally, it was a kind of like a 5-year span that they were going to kind of do some small iterations and then have a major architectural change. But in between AMD's Bobcat, ARM just exploding, and pretty much all computing being nearly good enough in terms of power and our everyday lives, Intel's finally kind of catching up. I mean, it's almost like going from Pentium 4 to the Core 2. I mean, it was just a massive jump in a short amount of time once they realized, hey, we really screwed this up. And I mean, their Atom, even at 32 nanometers, is not great. It's not terrible. But, it's got a lot of competition out there. But, if they're able to actually get down to 22 nanometer with a new architecture here shortly, which I think they're trying to do in 2013, then we can see them be a much, much better competitor.
Cool.
And, I mean, Intel's not usually wrong when they predict these sort of things. They've got a history of not necessarily holding back, but just keeping enough of to be able to jump just in case one of their competitors does. So AMD, we've seen it coming. ARM, on the other hand, is really looking at that server room and at the low-powered processing that people are actually picking up and doing. So all of a sudden now you've got them pretty much, direct aim at trying to beat Moore's Law by 2014.
Yeah.
Where they're talking about 14 nanometer. And as much as I like to say, you're dreaming of, it's Intel. They're not often wrong.
Yeah, I mean, they've had some bad experiences. They did have their discrete GPU offering that kind of bombed, and Atom has been underperforming since its introduction, but it's been wildly successful and profitable for them. And basically, what they're saying here is now at 14 nanometer, the high-end discrete or the high-end CPU option and the Atom CPU are going to be in step from that point on in terms of process technology. So they're definitely putting a higher focus on that rather than it being a kind of previous generation technology afterthought type of thing. We also swung by the OCZ booth. Alan, did you take a chance to look through this post where you looked at the Revo Drive 3, the Revo Hybrid, the Z Drive R4, the million IOPS per second?
Yes, I did. And as you finished off that post with, you're correct. I'm going to be very busy.
So let's start here in line here. The Revo Drive 3, these are PCI Express SSDs based on the new SandForce 2200 series of controllers. They're rated at, I thought, relatively competitive prices. You can get a 240 gig model. They're saying the MSRP is going to be $599. It's rated at 900 megs per second read, 700 write. And then the X2 model, which is basically doubling it from 2 SandForce controllers to 4 SandForce controllers, gets you up to 1500 megs per second read, 1200 write. And although they wouldn't tell us, they did say they moved away from, what did they use before, silicon image RAID controllers?
Yeah, it was an SI RAID chip, which actually scaled pretty darn well compared to anything else that was a RAID chip, because it didn't do any of the crazy caching and any of the other stuff. So that was one of the first good RAID. If you think way back where they used to have a 2.5-inch SSDs that were, it was like 2 controllers in one. Well, what was the name of that guy? It had 2 IndyLinks controllers with a RAID chip, and none of those other single chip cheesy RAID solutions will actually scale with command queuing and queue depth increases and stuff, which is the big perk of any SSD, is that big ramp you get in our IO meter benches. Well, the Revo drives with the silicon image controller were among the first that I saw do that properly. Were a RAID of SSDs, anything that wasn't already an integrated chipset solution. This one is not silicon image. I don't know. I've been talking back and forth with them. I don't know exactly what's in there, but it's supposed to be even much better at scaling than that. Right. So
did they tell you about the new firmware feature that will allow trim to filter through on these new drives?
Yeah, and that's supposed to be a function of their new controller. Basically, their controller, their firmware, their driver. It's all going to be, the silicon image thing, it just used the generic silicon image driver. Like, as a matter of fact, I think when I benched the Revo Drive 2, I don't even think I had to install a driver initially. Like, just Windows just had the silicon image RAID chip thing just built in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was even XP, I think, was the test bed at the time, and it had that built into that, right? So, yeah, so it was one of those old diehard, just, it worked really well, and, they found a good fit, like at OCZ. They found, like, a good fit for that kind of a, probably nobody was buying those chips anymore for anything, but they made it dance in their Revo 2, really.
Nice.
And so the Revo 3 is supposed to be the next step in there, and I don't think that. Well, first of all, I don't think there's a silicon image RAID chip that can handle 6 gigabit serial ATA.
Gotcha.
For starters, right? So there's part of your problem right there. They had to move to something else, and then I think while they did it, they were just like, all right, well, let's just go all the way and add trim support, add all these other things to it.
Right.
Yeah. So and the IOs per second is supposed to be pretty up there on this. I think
the screenshot's saying like 120,000 IOPS at 4K random write is what I'm reading.
Yeah. It's supposed to be pretty good.
200,000 on the X2 drive.
Yep, and keep in mind it's going to have to use some form of command queuing scaling ability to pull that off, because it's probably queue depth of 32 to get to that number. Right. Now the next drive, which is supposed to be much better, is that R4.
Right. This is the enterprise level unit.
Yeah. This is enterprise grade. That's supposed to have an even better controller, from what I understand. And actually, in that picture, you can see they have a whole bunch of solid-state caps.
Super caps.
So, yeah, well, no, they're not super caps, I don't think. Because super caps
there's enough of them, it makes a big super cap.
True, yeah. So I guess you
can we call them a mega cap?
It's a battery of caps. Call it that.
A variable cornucopia?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's actually the same trick that Intel was doing on the 320. Right, so instead of super cap, they wanted enterprise-ish sort of, sustainability on a power loss, so it could finish whatever writes it was doing. So same thing with the SAN 4. So it probably just works out that it's just cheaper to buy those solid-state ones than the super cap.
Sure.
Because super cap's kind of pricey.
So, and that one, they had a pair of those types of devices. Actually, they were the R488 models, and they had them running in a server that was running over 1 million IOPS on random 4Ks.
Did you say RG88?
R488?
R488.
No, that's too bad, because it's, RG88 would be so much cooler.
And so, okay, so here's what's really...
Empire Strikes Back, man.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what's really crazy to think about this. Who was the... This was like 6 months back, or actually close to a year back now. There was that company that put together that crazy test bed thing, and it had like their show-off system, and it had like 6 RAID cards and like 20 SSDs and all that. That only pulled off like 80 or 100,000 IOPS, just to give you an idea. So a year ago, you had companies ganging together, $3,000 worth of RAID cards and probably $10,000 worth of SSDs, and only pulling off 1/10 of that. Just to give you a
that's impressive.
Sort of a point.
Why don't you tell me about this Revo Drive Hybrid?
Okay, now that I actually don't have a lot of data on, but just from what I'm looking at right there, it's just some form of a controller that does probably the same thing in a very roundabout way that the Intel RST driver and their hybrid tech is doing at the same time, right? So what'll be interesting to see here is with the Intel solution, they're able to tweak what stuff gets cached, right? Because they're running at the OS level. They have an option ROM that's sort of built into the chipset, and it handles it until you get into the OS. But all the smart stuff is happening like with the driver, really.
Right.
So it's a tough call to see how well this will work compared to the Intel solution. However,
they're using a firmware technology from NVELO, NVELO. And the software or the firmware is called Dataplex. I have flyers here, but I don't I don't think you're going to be able to see
Flyers? Are these the flyers that I've been looking for?
These are the papers that you've been missing right here. So the big bar on the right that's taller, that's theirs, of course.
Of course.
And the one right below it is Intel SRT using the same SSD and hard drive. So they're basically saying theirs is more efficient.
Plus, their bar just so happens to be 8 inches long.
Right. The advantage
here... And they can go up to 120 gigs, too, can't they?
Yeah. So they're going to ship in two variants: 60 gig SSD and 120 gig SSD, starting at 500 gigs on the spindle-based drive. But the advantages are obviously Intel SRT is only a Z68. You can put this PCIe device in any motherboard, AMD motherboard, any other Intel motherboard. So you get the benefits of SSD caching and a hybrid drive that way, and also. It's fairly low cost. I think they said the 500 gig model with the 60 gig SSD was going to be about $400. So it's kind of a good, modest price thing there. They're not going to offer it with just the card where you plug in your own hard drive yet. They said that's a plan eventually, but they're doing extra certification on these with the specific hard drives that they ship out right now. So yeah, to work with any Intel AMD chipset processor under Windows 7, any hard drive, any SSD, all SATA modes are supported, IDE, AHCI, or RAID, no BIOS modifications. So yeah, there's some interesting advantages to it, so we'll have to wait till we get one and see what the actual performance differences are as well. But it's cool.
I want to see what they do in RAID 1.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty interesting. It's
RAID 0.
I'll tell you what. One big disadvantage will be of until they can come up with the use your own hard drive thing, is that's a laptop hard drive, right?
Yes.
So anytime you're hitting anything that's uncached, you're limited by laptop spindle speed, bottleneck, etc.
Gotcha.
All those things. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So hopefully they will quickly make one with a serial ATA port on it instead. That would be nice.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. Yeah. Let them know.
It's just amazing to me, looking back, that 11 years ago, OCZ was in a strip mall and had fake pictures of their building and a lot of testing machinery for the RAM on their website. Yeah. And now they're designing this stuff. That's it's kind of amazing.
The last thing they showed was their own micro-SATA SSD, basically based on the SandForce controller, saying that these can be used for people that are going to use Intel SRT or any of the other mSATA implementations as well. So there you go.
Which is good, because I want that to catch on.
You want more people? We want more competition there. Yeah.
No, I want that spec to catch on.
Oh, the mSATA spec.
Yeah, I want
Gotcha.
Every laptop out there should have one of those and one 2.5-inch bay, so you can have SSD and hard drive, and then hopefully with some form of Intel smart caching thing ability on there. Yep,
I'm good with that. Let's see. Yesterday we also saw AMD show off a Trinity APU. Josh, what is a Trinity APU? Do you have any idea?
Trinity APU is a next-generation bulldozer device that is supposed to be released next summer, and it is the next generation APU in that it is combined the bulldozer core with a future, most likely DirectX 11 ATI graphics processor. So we have to deal with Llano for the next year that are based on the Pentium, not Pentium 2, the Phenom 2 architecture. Next year, we'll get the upgrade to Bulldozer, and not only regular Bulldozer, but I believe an enhanced Bulldozer core. So hopefully it will be much more comparable to Intel's. Well, it's going to be Ivy Bridge by that point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll have a shot.
Now, unfortunately, you didn't take a picture of the back of that processor to see the pin count.
They didn't let us.
Oh.
They didn't let us. And actually, you can see from the photos that he didn't even, face the other half of the crowd with it. So Ken wasn't able to get a really, really good picture.
But Charlie D was able to get a close-up.
Rotate.
Yeah, he was. Go figure, huh? Are you surprised?
Yes.
Are you really surprised?
Really? No, I guess not, looking at his advertising.
All right, last bit of exciting, interesting Computex news is ASUS showing off a concept motherboard called Danshui Bei.
Danshui Bei?
Yes, exactly. That combines an LGA 1366 processor socket and a socket 2011 processor socket on the same PCB for some reason that I don't really understand. So socket 2011 is going to be the processor socket for the upcoming quad memory channel Intel Sandy Bridge E processor. It's going to come out next year, I guess now. Maybe later this year. I'm not sure exactly. So if you look at a picture of this mammoth beast of a motherboard, it has the socket, the LGA 1366 socket, and 6 DIMM slots. And then below that, it has the enormous 2011 socket with 8 more DIMM slots. And then you'll see some power connections and some SATA ports and some PCIe and blah, 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 blah. So this
Where
is
do
a
they
board
plug
that...
the PCIe at?
That is a waste of a PCB.
Your graphics card.
Maybe it's underneath the concept motherboard.
It's like further down, right?
Thing there. Yeah. Look at all those SATA ports, too. That's a lot of SATA ports. So, this is one of those motherboards that, ASUS tried to tell me they were actually going to sell, and I really don't think they are.
It's not going to happen. It
might have been more promising had they been able to share the DIMM slots or something in some way, or I don't really know.
That's like PCB routing hell.
Yeah, I don't know why they went through all the trouble to pull that off, honestly.
I don't know. Maybe it's not even electrically connected to anything. We never saw it running, right? So it could just be they just glued some shit onto a PCB and showed it to us. I don't think so. It's more believable to do that.
There's so much stuff there. It looks like you could take that motherboard and put it in a bandsaw and just cut right down the middle between the two, and then you can just have each.
Kind of like the original NVIDIA Fermi card.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only comment we have in this news post is I really don't see the point behind this, and I doubt anyone would get it outside of fun. And it's like, yes, that's pretty much exactly the point here. I don't know. They show off these weird motherboards. Remember, I think it was at CES or last Computex, they showed off a board that had a Radeon 5870 on the motherboard itself.
I remember back when they had a Voodoo 3 on a motherboard. That was
and was it ever released? Not really.
No.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. So that's it for Computex so far. We have 2 more days here. Ken and I will be going back over to the conventions hall as soon as I hang up the Skype call with you guys to see what else is out there. First, I guess, Josh, you did just publish your 990 FX review. We don't have to get into the full details of it, maybe get into a little bit of a preview here on what you saw, liked, or didn't like about either the chipset or this particular ASUS motherboard.
Okay, well, as you may or may not know, AMD didn't quite officially release the 990 FX platform, which is the first AM3 Plus chipset that is going to be available. The motherboard manufacturers mainly just kind of ganged together and said, hey, we would like to release this, but AMD's not doing anything special for it. They're not really pushing it because they don't have a processor for it, but we want to start getting these out. And AMD is like, yeah, it's probably a good idea to start building up some momentum. And so they released it. The interesting news is that, yes, these do support Bulldozer processors, and Bulldozer processors will be, or at least should be, available by the end of this summer. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a bummer. We were expecting it at the end of May, but apparently they ran
the motherboard vendors are just as sad as we are, trust me.
Yes, they're unhappy with the lack of new revenue opportunities that AM3 Plus would certainly enable. But the bad thing is that the stinking 990 FX is an exact copy of the 890 FX, and the SB950 chipset in the Southbridge is exactly the same as the SB850. So it's the same glass, it's the same silicon. They may have gone through some other revisions, but otherwise they are feature and pin compatible. So The bummer is, of course, there's nothing new, but the nice thing is that these are well-known platforms. These are well-known chips. We've seen essentially 2 years of them straight, going back from the 790 FX series, in fact, even longer than that, and not a whole lot has changed with that base technology. The Southbridge, of course, changed last year with the introduction of SATA 6 support, and during that time, AMD has been able to work on firmware, make it a little bit better, a little bit beefier, and so a lot of these new 990 FX boards feature some of that new core code. Good Lord. I should be on medication or something. But, we got 2 examples of that in. Asus and MSI both sent boards. Asus sent their Sabertooth, all in caps. Sabertooth 990 FX, tough. What tough stands for, the ultimate something or other. I don't know. But anyway, we've seen these tough boards with the P67 and some of the earlier models. These are kind of the boards that have the higher-end electrical components, but they may not necessarily have, a lot of the higher-end features like, dual gig E or kind of, more heavy-duty audio type stuff. But it's a well-built board, well-designed. They overclock very, very well. And now we're finally seeing these first products coming for AMD. MSI sent their A990 FXA-GD80, which is their new top-end offering for AMD. It replaces the 890 FXA-GD70, which I reviewed last year. The GD70 was a great board. It was really good. It was, kind of neck and neck with the Crosshair 4 formula. It was priced a little bit less. Very few people had problems with it. It had a nice feature set, can overclock well. It was nice. The GD80 is not that board. You would think that they'd be able to build upon the GD70 with it. That's not the case. It doesn't overclock as well. Their click BIOS is just a disaster to try to go through and work with.
That was the joystick's fault.
No. That was the Asus board. I learned my lesson before that. Yeah, no, the click BIOS is you have this mouse that you try to move around, and you have to double-click on stuff, and you wait a couple of seconds, and then you can then change the values of it, but you got to still use arrow keys and number pads and all this other stuff, and it's just a giant pain in the behind. There were times when I was trying to key in numbers for things, and it would wait literally 5 seconds before anything happened. I think, oh, great, it locked up in the BIOS. Finally, it shows back up, and, I was able to do what I needed to do in the BIOS. It was just really frustrating and annoying. Now, the board itself ran fine. I mean, it performed just where it was supposed to. It didn't overheat or anything. I did have some problems with the Ethernet that whenever it boot up and I'd try to find an IP address using DHCP, it would essentially kind of lock the computer up for about 10 to 15 seconds for no real apparent reason. Everything else would just boot up. This had problems. So there were a lot of this. This board essentially felt really undercooked. It needs some time to maybe another revision and certainly some BIOS work to work the kinks out and to make it a good board. It's got the feature set. It's got a nice design. It's got revised power circuitry that looks to be really good. But for right now, it's a board I would kind of stay away from. The Asus Sabertooth, however, is just at the very opposite end of the spectrum. It's highly polished. Their UEFI BIOS is just tremendous to work with. As Jeremy was talking about, I had a small problem when I first got in there. My mouse cursor kept going down to the bottom right corner. I had no idea why, and then I noticed that it saw 3 USB devices, and 2 mice, and I look up, and sure enough, I'd plugged in a joystick just for, grins, I guess, and it was uncalibrated, so it obviously was pulling down and to the right, and it was taking my mouse with it. So once I unplugged that, it worked perfectly fine, and the Asus was just, a dream to work with, and, I realized that lately I've been talking about the MSI video cards, how good they are, how impressive the afterburner utility is, and just, how well they are doing in that certain sector. Well, they're not quite there with their motherboards. I mean, it just was real rough. It has potential, but right now it's just too rough to handle. But there's the 990FX. It's out, and we should see those in retail here in the coming weeks.
Very cool. All right, guys. We didn't have any emails or voicemails to get to today because I was in Taiwan, internet connectivity issues, timing issues. So we'll be back on a mostly normal schedule next week. So please send in your emails, podcast@pcper.com, and leave us a voice message, 1-888-38-PC-PER, toll free in the U.S. and Canada. Thank everybody for joining us today. So make sure you check out pcper.com/Computex to get all of our Computex news and coverage from the past couple of days and for the pending couple of days. There's always news that we get to even after the show is over when we finally have more time, less time walking around and more time being able to sit in front of a computer and write for you guys. So pcper.com/Computex is the URL to get all of that information. So thanks again. I'm Ryan Strout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom, and I even had a good pick this week.
I'm Josh Walrath, and I'm really fuzzy.
And I'm Al Valentino.
Thanks for listening.